The cry for help. The streets of Ridgewood were quiet as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the neat rows of suburban houses. Officer Daniel Brooks cruised slowly through the neighborhood, his patrol car cutting through the serene silence. It was a routine evening shift, with little activity beyond the occasional jogger or dog walker. Daniel didn't mind the stillness. It gave him time to think, to unwind. But this evening, the peace shattered in an instant. Out of nowhere, a small figure darted into the road, arms flailing. Daniel slammed on the brakes, his heart leaping into his throat as the figure stopped in his headlights. It was a boy, no older than 9 or 10, his face pale, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. His shirt was smeared with crimson stains that made Daniel's stomach turn. Daniel jumped out of the car, his voice calm despite the tension knotting his chest. "Hey kid, are you okay? Are you hurt?" The boy stumbled toward him, his hands trembling so hard that they barely clung to the fabric of his torn hoodie. His face was streaked with dirt, his eyes wide with terror. They took her," the boy gasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You have to help." Daniel crouched down, gripping the boy gently by the shoulders. "Slow down, son. What happened? Who took who?" The boy's lip quivered, and for a moment, Daniel thought he might collapse. But he clenched his fists, steadied himself, and spoke. "The men. They came to our house. They took my mom." Daniel felt the world tilt. Kidnapping wasn't something that happened often in Ridgewood, if ever. He kept his voice steady. "What's your name?" "Elliot," the boy choked out. "Elliot Martin." "Okay, Elliot," Daniel said, keeping his grip firm but gentle. "Are you hurt? Where's your dad? Is anyone else in the house?" Elliot shook his head frantically, tears brimming in his eyes. "Dad." He tried to stop them. They hit him. He's not moving. There's blood. So much blood." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. This wasn't just a case of a child running away after a fight or a family dispute spiraling out of control. This was far worse. "Elliot, I need you to come with me," Daniel said firmly, opening the passenger door of his cruiser. "We're going to your house, but I need you to stay calm and tell me everything you can. Okay? The more I know, the faster I can help." Elliot hesitated but nodded, climbing into the car and clutching the seatbelt as if it were a lifeline. As Daniel pulled away, his mind raced through the possibilities. A domestic situation gone wrong, a random act of violence, or something more sinister. "Elliot," Daniel said gently as they drove, "can you tell me what the men looked like? Anything you remember could help." "There were 3 of them," Elliot said, his voice shaky but clear. "They wore masks. One of them was really big, with a deep voice. Another had tattoos on his arm. I saw them when his sleeve rolled up. And the third guy, he didn't talk much, but he had a knife. He kept waving it around." Daniel's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Did they have a car?" Elliot nodded. "A black van. It was old, with rust on the sides and no windows in the back." Daniel made a mental note, his training kicking into high gear. "You're doing great, Elliot. You're really brave. We're going to figure this out." When they arrived at the Martin residence, the sight that greeted Daniel confirmed Elliot's fears. The front door was ajar, the hinges splintered as if kicked in. Inside, the living room was in shambles. Furniture overturned, picture frames shattered, a coffee table smashed against the wall. But it was the streaks of blood leading to the kitchen that made Daniel's heart drop. "Elliot, stay here," Daniel said firmly, locking the car doors before stepping out. "I'll come back for you once I check it out." Elliot didn't protest. He curled into the seat, hugging his knees to his chest, his face buried in his arms. Drawing his weapon, Daniel approached the house cautiously. Every creak of the floorboards sent his adrenaline surging as he cleared each room. The kitchen was a scene of chaos. Broken plates scattered across the floor, a chair toppled sideways, and more blood smears leading to the back door. But it wasn't until he rounded the corner to the dining room that he found Elliot's father. The man lay sprawled on the floor, his head resting in a pool of blood. His breathing was shallow, his face pale. Daniel holstered his weapon and knelt beside him, checking for a pulse. Relief flooded him when he found one, faint but steady. "Sir, can you hear me?" Daniel asked, his voice firm but calm. The man's eyelids fluttered open. He groaned, his words slurring. "They took Sarah." "Sarah's your wife?" Daniel asked. The man nodded weakly. "You're going to be okay. Help is on the way." Daniel radioed for backup, calling in paramedics and additional units. As he waited, he returned to Elliot, who was staring anxiously out the car window. "Your dad's alive," Daniel said, crouching beside the car. "He's hurt, but he's going to be okay. The paramedics are on their way." Elliot's eyes welled up with tears, but he nodded, his small hands gripping the edge of the seat. "What about my mom?" "We're going to find her," Daniel promised. "I need you to stay strong and tell me anything else you remember." Elliot wiped his eyes. "They said they'd be back. For me." Daniel's stomach clenched. Whoever these men were, they weren't finished. A father's desperation. The evening air was heavy with tension as Officer Daniel Brooks stood in the chaos of the Martin household, surrounded by overturned furniture, shattered glass, and splatters of blood. The flashing red and blue lights from the patrol cars outside bathed the house in an eerie glow. Daniel's radio buzzed with updates from the responding officers and paramedics, but his focus remained on the task at hand. Elliot's father, Greg Martin, was being stabilized by the paramedics. His labored breaths and groans filled the otherwise silent house. His injuries were severe. A deep gash on his forehead and multiple bruises on his arms and chest suggested he'd fought hard before being overpowered. Greg's bloodshot eyes flickered open as the paramedics worked to stem the bleeding. Daniel knelt beside him, his voice steady but urgent. "Greg, I need you to stay with me. Can you tell me what happened? Anything you remember could help us find Sarah." Greg grimaced, his hand weakly gripping Daniel's sleeve. "They came out of nowhere," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "3 of them. Masks. Guns. They grabbed Sarah, and..." He trailed off, his face contorted in pain. Daniel leaned closer. "What else? Did they say anything? Did they take anything besides Sarah?" Greg's eyes darted toward the stairs, his expression clouded with fear. "They wanted money. Said they'd kill her if I didn't pay." "Did they give you a ransom amount?" Daniel pressed. Greg nodded faintly. 500,000. 48 hours. Daniel's mind raced. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was a targeted operation. The perpetrators knew Greg's family, or at least thought they did. "Did they mention a meeting place, or anything about how they contact you?" Greg shook his head weakly. "No, just said they'd be watching. Told me not to call the cops." Daniel exhaled sharply. It was a classic tactic, instilling fear and controlling the narrative. But Greg's decision to involve law enforcement was the best chance they had. The search begins. By the time Greg was loaded into the ambulance and taken to the hospital, the house had become a hub of police activity. Forensic teams meticulously documented the scene, photographing every piece of evidence and collecting samples. A trail of muddy footprints led from the backyard to the front door, suggesting the kidnappers had scoped out the property before making their move. Daniel stepped outside, where Elliot sat on the curb under a blanket, his small frame hunched and trembling. A female officer, Detective Lisa Hendricks, crouched beside him, speaking softly. "How's he doing?" Daniel asked, joining her. Lisa stood, her face etched with concern. "He's shaken, but he's a tough kid. He told me the men were arguing when they took his mom. Something about timing and getting it done quickly." Daniel nodded, his thoughts swirling. The mention of timing suggested the kidnappers were operating on a tight schedule. It gave him a lead, but also a sense of urgency. time was not on their side. "Elliot," Daniel said gently, crouching to the boy's level. "I know this is really hard, but you're helping us a lot. Do you remember hearing anything else? Maybe where they might have gone?" Elliot hesitated, his gaze fixed on the ground. "They had a black van," he whispered, "and one of them said something about a warehouse." "A warehouse?" Lisa asked, her brow furrowed. "Did they say where?" Elliot shook his head. "No, just the warehouse." Daniel exchanged a glance with Lisa. Ridgewood's industrial district was only a few miles away, dotted with abandoned warehouses, prime locations for criminals to operate undetected. "We'll start there," Daniel said firmly. He placed a reassuring hand on Elliot's shoulder. "You've been really brave. We're going to bring your mom home." Unraveling the threads. Back at the station, the team worked tirelessly, piecing together every shred of evidence. Surveillance footage from nearby traffic cameras captured a grainy image of the black van speeding away from the Martin residence, but its license plate was obscured. Still, it gave them a direction: toward the industrial district. Lisa stood beside a large map pinned to the wall, marking potential locations with a red marker. "There are at least 15 warehouses in this area," she said, pointing to the cluster of buildings on the map. "Most are abandoned, but a few still see occasional use." Daniel rubbed his temples, the weight of the case pressing down on him. "We'll need to split into teams and sweep the area. Start with the ones closest to the main roads. They'll need quick access to make their getaway." As officers prepared to head out, an unexpected call came in. A gas station attendant reported a suspicious interaction with a man driving a black van. The man had been agitated, purchasing cigarettes and a burner phone before speeding off. Surveillance footage confirmed the description: a large man with tattoos on his forearms, wearing a dark hoodie. "That's one of them," Daniel said, his adrenaline surging. "Let's track that phone." A dangerous discovery. The burner phone led them to a signal ping in the heart of the industrial district, near an old warehouse complex. Daniel and Lisa, along with a SWAT team, approached the location cautiously. The area was eerily quiet, the only sounds the faint rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. Inside the targeted warehouse, signs of recent activity were evident: discarded food wrappers, cigarette butts, and muddy footprints crisscrossing the floor. But there was no sign of Sarah or her captors. Lisa's voice crackled over the radio. "We've got tire tracks leading out of here. Looks like they left in a hurry." Daniel's jaw tightened. They were one step behind. Near a rusted workbench, a crumpled piece of paper caught Daniel's eye. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a crude map with a single location circled in red: Dock 14. "Dock 14, Daniel muttered. "The port's only a few miles from here." Lisa joined him, her eyes narrowing. If they're headed to the docks, they're planning to move fast. Maybe out of the city or the state. Daniel nodded. "We'll need to move faster." A father's plea. Back at the station, Greg Martin had been discharged from the hospital and brought in for further questioning. His face was pale, his movement slow, but his resolve was clear. "Officer," he said, his voice trembling, "I'll pay whatever they want. Just bring Sarah back, please." Daniel placed a hand on Greg's shoulder. "We're doing everything we can. But if they've moved to the docks, this isn't just about ransom anymore. They could be planning to disappear." Greg buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "I don't care what it takes. Just find her." Elliot stood nearby, clutching a drawing he had made, a simple crayon sketch of his family, holding hands and smiling. He held it out to Daniel. "Give this to her," he said softly, "so she knows we're looking for her." Daniel's chest tightened, but he nodded, tucking the drawing into his pocket. "I'll make sure she gets it." As the team prepared to head to Dock 14, Daniel glanced at the clock. Time was slipping away, but he refused to let doubt creep in. Sarah was out there, and he would bring her home, no matter the cost. The chase at Dock 14. The moon hung low over Ridgewood's industrial docks, its pale light reflecting off the still water. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the distant squawk of a seagull and the occasional hum of a passing truck. Officer Daniel Brooks stood with Detective Lisa Hendricks and their team, overlooking Dock 14 from a concealed vantage point. The air was heavy with anticipation. The rusted, weather-worn building before them stood like a fortress, its steel doors shut tight. Faint lights glowed through the cracks of its boarded-up windows, and shadows moved within. This was it, Sarah Martin, and the answers they sought were likely inside. Daniel's radio crackled softly. "We have visual confirmation of a black van parked behind the building," an officer reported. "No movement outside." Lisa adjusted her binoculars, scanning the area. "They've picked a strategic spot. Limited entry points, plenty of cover, and the water nearby if they need to make a fast escape." "They think they're safe here," Daniel replied. "That's their first mistake." He turned to the assembled SWAT team, his expression grim. "We do this by the book. No risks to the hostages. Breach quietly, secure Sarah and any captives, and neutralize the suspects." The team nodded in unison, their faces steeled with determination. Inside the warehouse, inside the decrepit building, Sarah Martin sat tied to a chair near the corner, her wrists rubbed raw from the rough ropes. Her face was pale, and her eyes burned from hours of stress, but she remained defiant. Her captors were careless, speaking freely in her presence as if she were nothing more than furniture. Victor, the leader of the operation, paced the floor, his broad shoulders casting long shadows under the flickering light, his scared face twisted with frustration as he barked orders to his men. "You too," he growled, pointing at his accomplices, a wiry man with a limp and a burly, tattooed thug. "Keep watch at the entrances. If you see anything, cops, random drunks, anything, you let me know immediately." The limping man hesitated. "Victor, this is getting risky. The ransom's one thing, but we're running out of time. The cops are probably already sniffing around." Victor shot him a glare so fierce it silenced any further protest. "We're sticking to the plan. They won't find us in time. And even if they do," he pulled a gun from his waistband, waving it menacingly, "we'll make sure they regret it." Sarah's heart raced, but she refused to show fear. Instead, she focused on her breathing, on keeping her mind sharp. Every detail mattered. Their movements, their words, their weapons. She had to stay alert if she was going to survive. The breach. Daniel's voice came through the comms, calm but commanding. "Teams in position. On my count. 3, 2, 1, move." The SWAT team advanced with precision, their movements soundless as shadows. 2 officers took positions near the rear of the warehouse, while Daniel and Lisa led the charge at the main entrance. With a sharp nod, a breaching charge was set against the steel door. The muffled explosion shattered the silence, and the door swung open with a groan. Flashbangs followed, their blinding light and deafening noise disorienting the kidnappers inside. "Police, don't move." Daniel's voice echoed through the warehouse as the team poured in, weapons trained on every corner. Victor reacted instantly, grabbing Sarah by the arm and dragging her to her feet. "Back off, or she's dead," he roared, pressing his gun to her temple. Sarah winced but didn't cry out. Her mind raced. She had to buy the officers time. "Victor," Daniel said, stepping forward with his hands raised. "Think this through. You're not getting out of here. Let her go, and we'll talk." Victor's eyes darted between Daniel and the advancing officers, his grip on Sarah tightening. "You think I'm stupid. I let her go, and I'm done. No way." Behind Victor, the limping man hesitated, his hands trembling. "Victor, this wasn't the plan." "Shut up," Victor snapped, his focus breaking for a split second. It was all Sarah needed, summoning every ounce of strength. She stomped hard on Victor's foot, throwing her head back against his chest. He stumbled, his grip loosening, and she twisted free, diving to the floor. "Now," Daniel shouted. The SWAT team surged forward. Shots rang out as Victor fired wildly, but the officers were faster. Within seconds, Victor was disarmed and pinned to the ground, his curses muffled by the officers restraining him. The burly thug raised his hands in surrender, his face pale with fear. The limping man, meanwhile, dropped to his knees, muttering, "I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this." Lisa quickly moved to Sarah, cutting the ropes from her wrists. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice steady. Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face as the adrenaline crashed. "I'm okay. I'm okay. My son, Elliot, he's with the police. Is he safe?" "He's safe," Daniel said, kneeling beside her. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to her. "He wanted me to give you this." Sarah unfolded the crayon drawing, her breath hitching as she saw Elliot's simple depiction of their family, hand in hand. "We're looking for you," it read in shaky letters. She clutched the drawing to her chest, sobbing. "Thank you." The aftermath. As paramedics tended to Sarah, Daniel and Lisa supervised the scene. The burly thug and the limping man were loaded into police vehicles, their heads bowed in defeat. Victor, however, was silent, his jaw clenched as he glared at Daniel. "You think this is over?" Victor spat as he was led away. "You've got no idea who you're dealing with." Daniel didn't flinch. "You'll have plenty of time to think about that." Inside the warehouse, the forensic team discovered a stash of documents and burner phones. Among the items was a ledger, names, dates, and amounts scrawled in Victor's handwriting. It was evidence of a larger operation, one that extended far beyond the Martins. Lisa held up the ledger, her expression grim. "Looks like this isn't just about Sarah. These guys have been doing this for years." Daniel nodded. "We'll take them down. All of them." A family reunited. Hours later, back at the station, Sarah was reunited with Elliot and Greg. The boy launched himself into his mother's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "I knew you'd come back," he whispered. Greg embraced them both, tears streaming down his face. "We're never letting this happen again," he vowed. Daniel watched from a distance, a sense of relief washing over him. It wasn't over. Not yet. There were still loose ends to tie up, still a larger network to dismantle. But for now, the Martins were safe. Lisa joined him, crossing her arms. "Another long night." Daniel smirked. Wouldn't have it any other way. As the Martins held each other, Daniel couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. There was still justice to be served, and he would stop at nothing to see it through. The bigger picture. The night gave way to dawn as Ridgewood Police Headquarters buzzed with renewed energy. The takedown at Dock 14 was a success. Sarah Martin was safe, and the 3 kidnappers were in custody. Yet for Officer Daniel Brooks and Detective Lisa Hendricks, the sense of triumph was fleeting. The discovery of Victor's ledger suggested something far larger and more sinister at play. Daniel sat in the briefing room, staring at the open ledger on the table. Each page was filled with cryptic notes, initials, locations, and monetary amounts that hinted at a network spanning multiple cities. The name Trevor Blake appeared repeatedly, often alongside significant sums of money. A name that hadn't been in play until now. "Trevor Blake," Daniel muttered, rubbing his temples. "He's been funding these operations." Lisa entered the room, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. She placed one in front of Daniel and took a seat across from him. "And profiting from them," she added. "Look at these amounts. $500,000 here, $250,000 there. This isn't just about ransoms. It's a full-blown extortion racket." Daniel nodded. Victor and his crew were just the foot soldiers. Blake's the one calling the shots. Lisa flipped through the ledger, stopping at a particularly grim entry. JM, $1.2 million. Unpaid. "What do you think this means?" "Could be another target," Daniel said. JM might have refused to pay, and Blake moved on to someone else. "We need to figure out who they are, and fast." Lisa leaned back, her eyes narrowing. There's something else. The way Victor talked during the takedown. It's like he was almost expecting us. He mentioned we didn't know who we were dealing with. What if Blake has connections? People on the inside. The thought made Daniel's stomach churn. Corruption within the force was a possibility he couldn't ignore. We can't rule anything out, he said. But first, we need to find Blake. A shadowy past. The name Trevor Blake wasn't entirely unfamiliar. Daniel remembered him as a once prominent figure in Ridgewood's business community. Years ago, Blake had co-owned a successful contracting firm with Greg Martin, but the partnership had ended in scandal when Greg accused Blake of embezzlement. The fallout was swift. Greg filed charges, but Blake disappeared before the case could go to court. Now, years later, it seemed Blake had reemerged, running a criminal empire. Greg Martin was in the station's conference room, his injuries bandaged, but his expression weary. Sarah and Elliot sat beside him, the family still shaken but determined to help. Daniel entered the room, his face grim. "Greg, we need to talk about Trevor Blake." Greg stiffened, his jaw tightening. "What about him?" "He's behind this," Daniel said. "We found his name in Victor's records. He's been funding these kidnappings and extortions." Greg's hands curled into fists. "That son of a—" He caught himself, glancing at Elliot before lowering his voice. "I knew he'd come back to haunt me. I just didn't think he'd stoop this low." "Why would he target your family specifically?" Lisa asked, joining them. "Is this just revenge for the embezzlement case?" Greg sighed, his shoulders sagging. "It's more than that. When I exposed him, it wasn't just about money. He'd been using the company to launder funds for other criminal enterprises. Drugs, illegal gambling, you name it. When I threatened to go public, he vanished. But I guess he didn't forget." Sarah's voice was shaky but resolute. "So he's doing this to punish us? To send a message?" "Partly," Daniel said. "But it's also about control. Blake's been running these operations for years, targeting anyone he sees as a threat or an opportunity. Tracking the mastermind. With the Martins' help, the investigation shifted into high gear. Greg provided a list of Blake's old associates, many of whom had faded into obscurity after his disappearance. Surveillance footage from the docks showed Blake's black sedan leaving the area shortly before the takedown at Dock 14. Forensic analysts traced the car to a luxury rental agency, but the trail ran cold after that. The breakthrough came when one of Victor's accomplices, the limping man, agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. His name was Lucas Hayes, and his knowledge of Blake's operations was limited, but he provided a crucial lead. "Blake's got a safe house," Lucas said during his interrogation. "Out in the hills, near Whitewater Lake. He uses it when he needs to lay low." "Why there?" Daniel asked, his tone sharp. "It's remote," Lucas replied. "Private. Nobody goes out there unless they know him. He's probably got a few of his guys guarding the place." Lisa crossed her arms. "And you think he's there now?" Lucas hesitated. "I can't say for sure. But if he's spooked, that's where he'll go." The Whitewater raid. By evening, the team was en route to Whitewater Lake, a sprawling expanse of wilderness dotted with vacation homes and secluded cabins. The safe house, according to Lucas's description, was an unmarked property hidden behind a dense grove of trees. As Daniel's convoy approached the area, the tension was palpable. The SWAT team prepared for a high-risk raid, knowing Blake wouldn't go down without a fight. The safe house came into view, a modest cabin with no visible signs of life. But as the team advanced, Daniel noticed subtle details, a faint glow from the basement windows, tire tracks leading to a shed, and the faint hum of a generator. "Stay sharp," Daniel said into his radio. "They're here." The team split into groups, surrounding the property. Daniel and Lisa took point, approaching the cabin's main entrance. With a nod, they breached the door, their weapons drawn. Inside, the cabin was eerily quiet. The living room was sparsely furnished, with a single laptop sitting on a coffee table. The faint sound of voices came from below. Daniel gestured toward the basement stairs, his pulse quickening. As they descended, the voices grew louder. Blake and his men were arguing. "This is your fault," Blake snarled. "You let them get too close. Now we're compromised." One of his men protested. "We didn't have a choice. Victor screwed up, not us." Daniel signaled for silence, then gave the order. The SWAT team stormed the basement, flashlights illuminating the dimly lit space. "Freeze!" Hands in the air. Blake spun around, his face a mask of fury. "You don't know who you're messing with," he shouted, reaching for a weapon. Before he could act, Lisa fired a warning shot that ricocheted off the wall. "Don't test us," she said coldly. Blake hesitated, then raised his hands in surrender. His men followed suit, dropping their weapons. Within minutes, they were in cuffs. Justice and consequences. Back at the station, Blake sat in the interrogation room, his arrogance intact despite the evidence piling against him. "You think this ends with me?" He sneered at Daniel. "I'm just a piece of the puzzle. Take me down, and someone else will fill the void." "Maybe," Daniel replied, his tone calm but firm. "But you're not walking out of here." With Blake in custody and his network exposed, the case against him grew stronger by the hour. Financial records, witness testimony, and physical evidence all painted a damning picture. The Martins, though still shaken, could finally begin to heal. As Daniel watched Greg, Sarah, and Elliot leave the station as a reunited family, he felt a rare sense of satisfaction. There was still work to be done. Blake's operation was vast, and the cleanup would take months, if not years. But for now, justice had prevailed. The web unravels. The early morning light crept over Ridgewood Police Station as the department sprang into action. With Trevor Blake in custody, the investigation was far from over. Officer Daniel Brooks and Detective Lisa Hendricks stood in the evidence room, reviewing the mountain of information they had collected. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of Blake's sprawling operation, but it also hinted at something larger, more dangerous, a network that stretched far beyond Ridgewood. Lisa placed a stack of documents on the table, exhaling sharply. "We've got enough to put Blake away for life. Financial records, burner phone logs, the ledger. It's airtight." Daniel nodded, though his expression remained tense. "But this isn't just about him. He's part of a larger machine. We need to take down the whole network." Lisa flipped through a folder, stopping at a list of names linked to Blake's operations. "If these contacts are legit, we're looking at connections to other cities, maybe even interstate crimes. Blake's been laundering money, organizing kidnappings, and running extortion schemes for years. We need federal backup." Daniel agreed. "I'll reach out to the FBI. They'll want to see this." Blake's interrogation. Meanwhile, Trevor Blake sat in the sterile interrogation room, his expensive suit now rumpled, his confident demeanor cracking under the weight of his situation. Despite his arrogant posturing, Daniel could see the cracks forming. "You've got nothing on me," Blake said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying him. "You think a few documents and scared accomplices will hold up in court? You're wasting your time." Daniel leaned forward, his voice calm but sharp. "We have more than a few documents, Blake. Your ledger outlines every illegal deal you've made. Your men are flipping on you left and right. And let's not forget the Martins. You targeted a family to settle a petty score. You're done." Blake smirked, though it was weaker now. "You really think you've won? You have no idea how deep this goes." "Then tell us," Daniel countered. "Cooperate, and maybe the DA will cut you a deal. Otherwise, you're looking at decades behind bars." Blake's smirk faltered. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but his silence spoke volumes. A chilling revelation. Hours later, the forensic team made a discovery that sent a chill through the station. An encrypted hard drive recovered from Blake's safe house contained more than just financial records. It held detailed plans for upcoming operations. One of them stood out: Operation Ashwood. Lisa squinted at the screen as the tech team decrypted the files. Ashwood. It's a town just outside Ridgewood, right? Daniel nodded, his brow furrowed. Small, quiet place. Why target it? The files revealed a horrifying plan. Blake's network had identified Ashwood as a prime location for a new wave of extortion. Their plan involved targeting influential residents, local business owners, the mayor, even school board members, using threats and intimidation to gain control. They were going to take over the whole town, Lisa said, her voice low. Start small, build influence, and expand their reach. Daniel's jaw tightened. They weren't just criminals. They were building an empire. A race against time. Despite Blake's arrest, his network was still operational. His lieutenants, spread across multiple locations, were likely aware of his capture and could move forward with the plans in his absence. The clock was ticking, and Daniel knew they had to act fast. Daniel called an emergency meeting, gathering every available officer. We've identified key locations connected to Blake's operation, he explained, pointing to a map marked with red pins: warehouses, safe houses, and drop points. Our priority is shutting these down and apprehending his associates before they can regroup. Lisa chimed in, her voice firm. We've contacted federal authorities. The FBI is sending agents to assist, but we need to move now. Every second we wait gives them a chance to disappear. The department mobilized, officers spreading out across the region to raid the identified locations. Daniel and Lisa led one of the teams, heading to a warehouse on the outskirts of Ashwood, a suspected hub for the operation. The warehouse showdown. The warehouse loomed in the distance, its rusted exterior blending into the desolate landscape. As Daniel's team approached, the faint hum of machinery inside hinted at activity. He motioned for silence, signaling the SWAT officers to take their positions. Through a crack in the wall, Daniel saw figures moving inside, men loading crates into the back of a truck. The crates were unmarked, but Daniel had a sinking feeling about their contents. On my count, Daniel whispered into his radio. 3, 2, 1. The SWAT team stormed the warehouse, their shouts echoing through the cavernous space. The suspects scattered, some raising their hands in surrender, others reaching for weapons. A firefight erupted, the sharp crack of gunfire slicing through the air. Daniel took cover behind a stack of crates, his heart pounding. He spotted one of the suspects, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, aiming a rifle at Lisa. Without hesitation, Daniel fired, the suspect dropping to the ground. Clear. Lisa shouted moments later, her voice cutting through the fading chaos. The team secured the remaining suspects, zip-tying their hands as the warehouse fell silent. Inside the crates, they found weapons, counterfeit cash, and detailed maps of Ashwood. The network collapses. As the raids continued, similar discoveries were made at other locations. Blake's operation was crumbling, his lieutenants arrested one by one. The FBI's involvement brought resources and expertise, ensuring no stone was left unturned. Back at the station, Daniel and Lisa reviewed the progress. The scale of Blake's network was staggering, but their efforts had dealt it a fatal blow. It's over, Lisa said, leaning back in her chair. We've got Blake, his men, and enough evidence to put them all away. Daniel nodded, though he couldn't shake the lingering unease. For now. But someone like Blake doesn't build this alone. There could be others. Lisa sighed. Maybe, but we'll deal with them if they show up. For now, let's take the win. A moment of peace. For the Martins, life was slowly returning to normal. Greg focused on rebuilding his business, while Sarah and Elliot leaned on each other for support. The scars of their ordeal would take time to heal, but they were determined to move forward. At the station, Daniel received an unexpected visitor, Elliot. The boy clutched a small card in his hands, which he handed to Daniel with a shy smile. Thank you, Elliot said softly. "For bringing my mom back." Daniel opened the card, its colorful crayon drawings depicting the Martins as a happy family. His heart swelled, and he smiled. "You're welcome, kid," Daniel said. "But you and your mom, you're the brave ones." As Elliot left with his parents, Daniel felt a rare sense of closure. The fight wasn't over, but for now, Ridgewood was safe. The final threads. As dusk settled over Ridgewood, the final pieces of the Trevor Blake operation began falling into place. The FBI's arrival brought new momentum, their resources uncovering connections that had been hidden for years. Financial records from Blake's encrypted hard drive revealed a trail of payments to offshore accounts and a web of shell companies. Each lead opened new doors, but the implications were chilling. Daniel stood in the station's operations center, watching agents and officers work tirelessly. The air buzzed with urgency. Blake's empire had been larger and more organized than anyone had imagined. Lisa approached, holding a freshly printed report. "We just got confirmation on those offshore accounts. They tie back to known criminal syndicates operating in 3 states. Blake wasn't just running a local operation. He was a key player in a multi-state crime ring." Daniel exhaled sharply, the weight of the revelation sinking in. If he's connected to larger syndicates, they'll retaliate. They'll want to silence anyone who can expose them, including Blake. Lisa nodded, "Which means we need to secure him and his associates before they get to him. We also need to dig deeper into his lieutenants. Someone has to know more." A suspect flips. Back in the interrogation room, Lucas Hayes, the limping man, sat hunched over, his hands trembling as he sipped from a styrofoam cup. His earlier bravado had dissolved under the pressure of interrogation. Lisa sat across from him, her tone steady but firm. "You've already told us about the safe house," Lisa said. "But if you think that's enough, you're wrong. We need names, locations, and details. Cooperate fully, and the DA might consider a deal. Stay quiet, and you'll go down with Blake." Lucas glanced at the one-way mirror, his eyes darting nervously. "I don't know everything," he said, his voice shaky. "But I know enough." "Then start talking," Lisa said. Lucas hesitated before leaning forward. "Blake's not the top dog. He reports to someone else, someone they call the broker. I've never met him, but Blake talked about him like he was untouchable. Said the broker handles the money, the connections, everything." Daniel, watching from the observation room, frowned. "The broker," he repeated, the name unfamiliar yet ominous. Lucas continued. "Blake was supposed to deliver a report to him in 2 days. Some kind of status update on Ridgewood and Ashwood. If the broker doesn't hear from him, he'll know something's wrong." Lisa pressed further. "Where was Blake supposed to meet him?" "Not here," Lucas said. "The broker doesn't come to Ridgewood. Blake had a burner phone. He was supposed to call a number and set up the meeting. I swear, that's all I know." Lisa leaned back, her expression unreadable. "You'd better hope that's true." Closing in. The information Lucas provided led the team to Blake's burner phone. Technicians quickly retrieved the number Lucas mentioned, and a trace revealed it had been used near a private airstrip outside the city. The location was quiet, isolated, and an ideal spot for a high-profile criminal to operate discreetly. "We've got a location," Lisa said, briefing the team. "If the broker's involved, this could be our only shot at intercepting him. We need to move fast." Daniel nodded. "We'll treat this like Blake's takedown. Full perimeter sweep. Approach with caution. The broker won't come unprepared." As the team prepared to mobilize, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into dangerous territory. The broker's anonymity meant he was careful, calculating, a criminal used to staying out of sight. The airstrip confrontation. The private airstrip was cloaked in darkness when Daniel's team arrived, their vehicles parked a safe distance away. A single hangar stood at the edge of the tarmac, its large doors slightly ajar. Inside, faint voices and the hum of machinery hinted at activity. Daniel signaled for the team to fan out, securing the perimeter. Through night vision scopes, they spotted several armed men patrolling the area, guards likely working for the broker. Lisa crouched beside Daniel, her voice a whisper. This is more than just a meeting. They're moving something. Equipment, maybe cash. Or tying up loose ends, Daniel replied grimly. We can't wait. The SWAT team moved in with precision, breaching the hangar's entrance in coordinated waves. Inside, chaos erupted. The armed guards fired back, their bullets ricocheting off metal crates and walls. The officers responded with tactical precision, quickly overwhelming the resistance. Amid the chaos, Daniel spotted a figure slipping through a side door, a man in a tailored suit, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. It had to be the broker. Lisa, cover me, Daniel shouted, breaking away from the group. He pursued the figure across the airstrip, his footsteps pounding against the asphalt. The broker reached a waiting car, but before he could climb in, Daniel tackled him to the ground. The man struggled, but Daniel's grip was unyielding. It's over, Daniel growled, pinning the broker's arms behind his back. Unmasking the truth. Back at the station, the broker's identity was revealed. Alan Royce, a wealthy financier with a spotless public record. His arrest sent shockwaves through the community, but for Daniel, it confirmed what he had suspected all along. Blake's operation was just one arm of a much larger network. Under interrogation, Royce remained calm, his demeanor almost smug. You think you've won, he said, his voice icy. You've barely scratched the surface. Daniel didn't flinch. Then start talking, or you can watch your empire burn from behind bars. Royce smirked but said nothing. It didn't matter. His arrest, combined with the evidence from Blake's network, was enough to dismantle the operation. For now, Ridgewood could breathe easier, hope restored. As the Martins began rebuilding their lives, they remained grateful for the officers who had fought to protect them. Sarah and Greg knew the scars of their ordeal would linger, but they were determined to create a brighter future for Elliot. One evening, as Daniel left the station, he found a note taped to his car. It was from Elliot, a crayon drawing of a police officer with the words, "Thank you for saving us." Daniel smiled, folding the note and tucking it into his jacket. The fight against crime was far from over, but moments like this reminded him why he did it. The ripple effect. The arrest of Alan Royce, known to his criminal network as the broker, sent shockwaves through Ridgewood and beyond. Media outlets scrambled to report the downfall of the wealthy financier who had secretly orchestrated extortion, kidnapping, and organized crime operations for years. The revelation ignited public outrage and a demand for answers, as Royce's pristine public image crumbled under the weight of the evidence against him. But for Officer Daniel Brooks and Detective Lisa Hendricks, Royce's capture was only the beginning. Royce's silence. Seated in the sterile interrogation room, Alan Royce exuded an air of defiance. Despite the overwhelming evidence connecting him to Trevor Blake's criminal network, he remained frustratingly tight-lipped. Daniel entered the room, his demeanor calm but firm. We've traced millions in dirty money to your accounts. Your associates are flipping on you one by one. We have recordings, documents, and witnesses. The game's over, Royce. Royce leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. You think arresting me fixes everything. You've disrupted one branch of a tree that spans far wider than you can imagine. Lisa stepped in, her tone sharp. Then enlighten us. You're already facing a life sentence. Cooperate, and maybe you can shave some time off, or keep playing games, and watch your empire collapse piece by piece. Royce's smirk faltered slightly, but he remained silent. Daniel slammed a folder onto the table, spilling out photos of Royce's known associates and transactions. You targeted families. You ruined lives. And for what? Money? Power? Royce finally spoke, his voice cold. You wouldn't understand. This is bigger than one town, one family. You're wasting your time. Daniel exchanged a glance with Lisa. Royce wasn't just protecting himself. He was protecting something, or someone, far more dangerous: the network's reach. As Royce stonewalled investigators, the FBI and local authorities continued dismantling his operations. Each new raid uncovered more connections, revealing a web of criminal activities that spanned multiple states. From human trafficking to arms smuggling, the scale of the enterprise was staggering. Lisa stood in the operations center, studying a sprawling map dotted with red pins. "Every one of these locations ties back to Royce or his lieutenants," she said, her voice grim. "But the deeper we dig, the more we realize how interconnected this all is." Daniel nodded, his eyes scanning the map. Royce might not be the top of the chain. He's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. A tech analyst approached, holding a tablet. "We've decrypted more files from Royce's hard drive. There's correspondence between him and an entity referred to as Argent. The messages are vague, but it's clear Argent was providing funding and logistical support." "Argent?" Lisa repeated. "What is that? A person? A group?" The analyst shrugged. "We're not sure yet, but the tone of the messages suggests Royce answers to them." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then that's our next target. A dangerous connection." As the investigation shifted focus to uncovering the identity of Argent, the Martins faced their own struggles. The media attention surrounding their ordeal brought both support and scrutiny. Greg received offers to restart his business, but his pride made it difficult to accept charity. Sarah, meanwhile, focused on helping Elliot regain a sense of normalcy, but the boy remained haunted by nightmares of the kidnapping. One afternoon, Daniel visited the Martins at their home. Elliot greeted him with a shy smile, holding the sketchpad. "I drew something for you," Elliot said, handing Daniel a new drawing. This one depicted Daniel and his team standing in front of a glowing shield, protecting a family from shadowy figures. Daniel crouched to meet Elliot's gaze. "This is amazing, buddy. You've got real talent." Elliot's smile widened. "Do you think the bad guys are gone for good?" Daniel hesitated, his heart heavy. "We're working hard to make sure they are, but I promise you're safe now." As Elliot ran off to show his drawings to Sarah, Greg joined Daniel on the porch. "He's been asking a lot of questions about what happened," Greg said. "I don't know how to explain it without scaring him." Daniel placed a reassuring hand on Greg's shoulder. "Just tell him the truth, that he's safe, and that you'll always protect him. Kids are stronger than we think." The final raid. Back at the station, the FBI uncovered a lead on Argent's operations. A hidden server traced to an abandoned tech firm on the outskirts of Chicago had been used to funnel encrypted communications and financial transactions. Royce's messages confirmed it was a critical hub for the operation. Daniel and Lisa were among the officers deployed to assist the FBI task force. As they approached the facility, the tension was palpable. Drones scouted the perimeter, revealing armed guards patrolling the site. This wasn't just a tech hub. It was a fortress. The task force moved in with military precision, breaching the building in coordinated waves. Inside, they encountered heavy resistance, the guards firing from fortified positions. Daniel and Lisa pressed forward, weaving through the chaos as bullets ricocheted around them. In the server room, technicians scrambled to destroy evidence, smashing hard drives and setting fires. Lisa tackled one of them, wrestling a laptop from his grasp. Daniel subdued another, shouting into his radio, "We need fire suppression in here now." The team secured the facility, recovering what remained of the servers. The data they salvaged was fragmentary but revealing. Argent wasn't just a financial backer. It was an international syndicate with roots in technology, finance, and crime. A Pyrrhic victory. The raid on the tech firm was a success, but it came at a cost. 2 officers were injured, and much of the data had been destroyed. Still, the evidence they recovered provided a glimpse into Argent's reach and its ruthlessness. Back in Ridgewood, Daniel sat in his office, reviewing the reports. The weight of the case pressed heavily on his shoulders. Royce's operation had been dismantled, but Argent remained in the shadows, a looming threat that seemed almost insurmountable. Lisa entered, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said, handing him a mug. Daniel smirked weakly. "Feels like it. Every time we get closer, the trail shifts. It's like chasing a ghost." Lisa sat across from him, her expression determined. "But we're making progress. Royce is locked up, and his network is in pieces. Argent may be out there, but they're not invincible." Daniel nodded, though the uncertainty lingered. "We'll keep going, for the Martins and everyone else caught in their web." A glimmer of hope. Despite the challenges, Daniel allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The Martins were safe, and Royce's capture had sent a powerful message to those who thought they were untouchable. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was a step toward justice. As he left the station that evening, Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out Elliot's drawing of the glowing shield. He studied it for a moment, then smiled. Sometimes, hope came in the smallest gestures.